Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I'm showing off another part of my complete run of Avengers. Previously, I've shown issues 1 to 100, and then 101 to 150, 151 to 200 in the 3 previous videos in the series. Today, we're going to be doing issues 201 to 250, which is a pretty interesting era in terms of Avengers. Real quick before I get to that, I do want to mention my Kickstarter for Cthulhu vs. Uncle Sam, number 2, ends on Monday, and on Monday night I'll be having a live stream for the last hour, counting down the last hour of that Kickstarter. So I'm going to have the links down below to both the Kickstarter and the live stream. Join me Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and I'll answer any of your questions about comics. It doesn't have to be about the Kickstarter, and we'll just have a big old party. So anyway, thanks. I just wanted to share that real quick before we get to this. It's Avengers number 201. And so just real quick with Avengers, for my money, the first 300 issues of Avengers or so, the first 25 years of the book, are maybe the most consistently good series in comics. I know, controversial. You could say, some people might say Fantastic Four, but I think Avengers was better than Fantastic Four for a long time in the 70s and early 80s. Avengers just consistently baseline good, frequently excellent, or just beyond excellent. So that's how I feel about the series. But I will say that this is part of the only sort of extended down period for the series until you get, for me, past issue 285. Series, it's the issues in the 190s are hit and miss. Some of them are really good, but it does slide a little bit. Then starting with issue 200, we get this batch of comics that I think some of them are okay, but it just doesn't sort of carry the tradition until you get to 211 and there's a whole reset. So 201, cool Jarvis cover. This is a fun Jarvis backup story, if I'm remembering correctly. It's also the first part of an Ultron series. It's interesting that they decided to put Jarvis on the cover instead of Ultron. Jarvis is cleaning up the debris, I'm guessing, from the mansion almost being destroyed in issue 200. And the series almost being destroyed by that horrible story. And then we have part 2 of that 202. Again, it's an Ultron story. And the story's fine. 203, it's a Beast and Wonder Man sort of horror story. Where they go down in the sewers, and I really like Beast and Wonder Man together, but it's just okay. 204 and 205 are a two-parter with the return of Yellow Claw. These issues are actually better than, I was going to say better than Reputation, but they don't have any reputation, other than one of the last times Marvel's going to use Yellow Claw, because it is a pretty racist character. But it's not a bad story. Vision is the main part of the story, and I'm a big fan of Vision. You can see my copy is signed up here by Joe Rubenstein, who inked the cover. A number of these are signed, so I'll be showing those as we go. As you know, if you watched the previous videos, when I go to conventions to get signatures, my rule is if they worked on Avengers, I always have them sign Avengers, and then only after that do I have them sign anything else they might have done. So I have a lot of my Avengers run at this point. Quite a number of them are signed. Here's 205, the second part of this storyline. 206, Gene Colan becomes the regular artist for a brief time. Now, Colan had been the regular artist on Avengers once before in the 60s, both in the 1960s and the number-wise in the 60s. I say regular artist, he really only did a couple issues, but he did 65, part of the Clinton Barton storyline. And here he comes back for a few issues, and Gene Colan's great when he's great, but this is not a book that I think is really plays to his strengths. And he's not helped at all by a series of increasingly boring and subpar stories. So this story, totally forgettable. I don't remember anything about it. And then we have The Shadow Lord Cometh, 207, and a very similar thing in 208, because this one says, He lives again after countless centuries, and then this one is like, from eons past comes the world's most savage warrior, the Berserker lives again. I don't remember if this is a two-parter or what, but it's just not very good. And this one I have signed by the inker as well. In this case, it's Bob Wyachek, so you can see his signature there. 209, the Resurrection Stone. Will it save or the universe or destroy it? There's a couple issues here that kind of focus on Beast a little bit. I think this is one where Beast is trying to... something had happened to his girlfriend, and he was trying to get a stone to help her. Beast also prominent on the cover of this completely forgettable issue 210, The Weathermen. So it's interesting to me that several of these issues, like 203 as well, is a Beast-centric comic. There aren't very many of those in Avengers. And I think Beast is great in Avengers, but consistently the stories where they focus on him are some of the worst. Like, I think of the first 300 issues, the worst of all of them is 178, which is a fill-in story about... It was a solo Beast story with Carmen Infantino art. It's just horrible. So this whole run from 200, which I'm not showing in this video, up to 210, is just... The high points are just okay, and then it gets pretty bad. And that changes abruptly with 211 because Jim Shooter takes over. Now, this is obviously a controversial storyline. I've done a multi-part podcast about this run, so I'll try and link to those below as well if you want to really hear me talk at length about this storyline. For me, it's some of the best writing that Shooter has done. Obviously, there's some problematic elements, which... again, we'll discuss in a lot of detail in the podcast. I'll just skim over it here a little bit. But this issue, Shooter completely upends the team by getting rid of a bunch of really long-time members. So Beast, Wonder Man, both been in the series for a number of years, but also Vision and the Scarlet Witch, whose relationship is basically the center, in a lot of ways, of the book for the last 100-plus issues. Vision for a long time was in the corner box. All of those people leave the team, and what Shooter does is he brings back the original Avengers lineup. Not counting Hulk, but he was never really an Avenger in my opinion. Controversial. But I mean the classic original Avengers lineup. So it's got Hank Pym, it's got Wasp, Thor, Iron Man, Captain America, and then they had Tigra, which seems like a weird choice, but I think it turns out to be actually really excellent. And so he's definitely setting everything up for what he's planning on doing in this by completely resetting it to where he wants it to be. 212 kicks off the actual storyline where Hank Pym is trying to prove himself. He's having a bit of a breakdown. He doesn't think he's worthy of being a hero, and so he attacks this the Elf Queen when she's about to surrender, and almost causes the destruction of everything, which results in the court-martial of Yellowjacket. Of course, one of the most infamous Avengers stories, because this is the issue where Hank Pym hits Jan, and there's a lot of debate about that. Shooter claims he didn't intend it to look quite like it did, and kind of blames the artist Bob Hall. Bob Hall has said maybe it was his mistake because he wasn't that good of an artist yet. That's what he said in interviews. But regardless, this is what we got. And it results in what I think is one of the most interesting and best written, from a writer's perspective, stories in Avengers history and really in comics. The writing is excellent in this. 214 is a Ghost Rider story. And this is not a coincidence. And the Ghost Rider's in this. This is during a period where Johnny Blaze really doesn't have much control over himself as Ghost Rider. Zarathos, the demon, is really in control. So when he transforms, he sort of loses control of himself. And the result is that this is explicitly, it's even mentioned in the comics, it's explicitly a metaphor for what is happening with Hank Pym at the same time. 215 and 216, great two-parter with the Molecule Man. Absolutely fantastic. Alan Weiss art is absolutely fantastic in these. It's unfortunate that they have this stupid 10-speed racer thing at the top. But these are some great issues, and some really, really great stuff happens in here. This is where we see why Tigra is in the book. Jim Shooter said that she was in the book to sort of show that not everyone's cut out to be an Avenger. And that is true, but I think people take that as sort of a slight against Tigra. But when you really read the story, it's actually an indictment of the Avengers, because what happens in this story is that the Molecule Man's taken the Avengers captive, and they've freed themselves, and Iron Man and Captain America have a big debate where they almost get into a physical fight with each other about what to do with Molecule Man, because Iron Man insists that they should kill him, and Captain America says we can't do that. And it really, what this issue is like a key sort of character moment for those two in their relationship, because everything that happens later in Civil War and before that in Operation Galactic Storm, it happens here first. But the really important part is that while they're arguing how much force to use, whether they should use lethal force or just enough force to, beat him down, Tigra shows up and is like, actually Molecule Man surrendered because I just talked to him, and he has a lot of like emotional issues and he just needs help. And so it's a commentary again in a way that I didn't realize the first couple times I read it, but all of these stories, even when Yellowjacket's not in there, they're commentary on what's happening with Yellowjacket. And in this case, the commentary is about how the Avengers are a fighting team. They're a team designed to just attack and fight, and they don't have like the interpersonal skills really that they should, and they don't really know each other. Like, this is the storyline where Tony Stark and Don Blake tell Captain America that of their secret identities because they hadn't told him. And again, it's all sort of this thing with like the Avengers only know how to fight things, when you have violence as your only option in terms of problem solving, you're going to be creating as many problems as you solve, and there's a lot of problems you can't solve that way. And so Tigra quits the team because she's like, I can't handle all this constant violence. This really isn't for me. But it's really an indictment of how the Avengers work, basically saying, like, if any of them had been talking to Hank Pym before this happened, and if Hank Pym himself was someone that talked with other people rather than resorting to violence even in his personal relationships, then all of this could have been avoided. So I really, really good. And the story besides those parts of the stuff with Molecule Man is really great. 217, this is where Yellowjacket gets framed by Egghead. So everyone thinks Egghead is dead. They don't believe Hank, and so they think Hank is like a criminal mastermind at this point, that he's gone totally around the bend. And we as the readers know that he's being set up, but it just continues his downward spiral. 218, fill-in issue. Don't need to talk about that too much. 219, 220. It's a two-parter with Moondragon. Let me show you the covers. There's 219. And this is also, it's commentary really on Hank Pym's stuff, even though he's not in it. Because this is a situation where the team gets mind controlled, and Moondragon sort of mind controls everybody. And there's another debate about how much violence to use. Eventually, like, people have their emotions manipulated, and they lash out violently, or the opposite. And Drax, has some mental health issues and basically turns into a rage monster. And so there's a lot of stuff about Hank Pym's mental health issues in here, and again how the Avengers react to that. It's also a deeply problematic storyline because Moondragon mind controls Thor into sleeping with her, and that seems like a horrible misstep just on the face of it, but particularly from Jim Shooter, who had just had to extensively apologize for what he wrote in issue 200, with Carol Danvers. So yeah, it's dicey. Got a couple classics here, classic covers. Classic 221. This is where we get some new team members. Hawkeye and She-Hulk join the team. This is where She-Hulk joins the Avengers. This comes right after She-Hulk solo series has ended. So you can kind of see Shooter as editor-in-chief pulling the strings a little bit because they want to keep that character relevant even though her series solo book just ended. Great dynamic with Hawkeye and She-Hulk. Great cover. 222. Egghead returns with the new Masters of Evil. Always love Masters of Evil. They're always great in Avengers. 223. It's a fill-in, but it's a classic. It's an all-time classic. Classic cover, first of all, and then a great story in here where Hawkeye and Scott Lang are both at the circus, and they end up running into Taskmaster. It's interesting to think that in the early days, Taskmaster was actually Ant-Man's archenemy, because in Taskmaster's first 2 or 3 appearances, it was Scott Lang who he was going up against each time. But great cover, great story. This 224 is all like a relationship character story, and it's absolutely fantastic. One of the high points of the run. It's an issue where Tony Stark starts having a relationship with Jan, and she doesn't know that he's Iron Man. So it's all about, again, the way the Avengers interact and the way they should interact, and it's more about sort of like consent and stuff. It's really great issue. And then Captain America, Steve Rogers basically goes to Tony and is basically like, this is wrong what you're doing. Great issue. 225, a great cover. Ed Hannigan. This is a 2-parter that Shooter leaves the book after that last issue, 224. He goes out on a high point, but he also leaves all these threads. And so while they're picking up the pieces by bringing in Roger Stern, they do this 2-parter fill-in. Written by Stephen Grant, who has autographed my copies of both issues. So here's a signature there. Great cover. Story, it's so-so. The Avengers go back in time to help the Black Knight, who's been trapped in the past for like 10 years. And at the end of the story, he's brought back to the present day, which is great. It's interesting. He gets brought back in the present day in this story from Grant. He's not in the next run of Avengers. He doesn't come back into Avengers till after issue 250. But in the meantime, he is brought back more by Roger Stern in the pages of Doctor Strange. So 227. Here's a book that's gotten a little bit hot recently. Oh, I can see that I bent the corner on mine. Oh well, whatever. Mine also is writing all over the cover because it's signed by artist Brett Breeding here. And it's signed by the writer Roger Stern right there. This is Stern's first issue. It's sort of a recap of everything, but we also have Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau joining the team, which is why this book has gotten a little bit hot. I think it's died back down. I'm not really sure where it's at now. And then we have the Trial of Yellowjacket, a great 3-parter. Just great. The end of the story is absolutely fantastic. Roger Stern really brings everything together, ties everything up, really nails it. 229, the death of Egghead, in the big climax of this storyline. And then 230, great issue. Hank Pym quits the team, quits being Yellowjacket. Yeah, really great. One of Al Milgram's best covers. I think the series was really hamstrung for a long period of time here by having Milgram as the regular artist. I think this era is not looked at that highly because of Milgram's art. But I'm here to tell you that Roger Stern is solid to great throughout this run. And so if you reread these issues and just focus on the story and not the art so much, I mean, this is great either way, but the next stories, actually, there's some really good stuff in this era that is really overlooked, I think. 331. 232, Star Fox joins the team. Again, another book that's gotten some heat because of the Star Fox stuff in the MCU, and I think that kind of heat is dumb. Like, his first appearance was 10 years before this, so who cares? Bringing in another character with problematic powers involving mind control and how that intersects with consent issues, because he does use his power to make people feel good on people. He does end up sleeping with She-Hulk, and much more recently they've addressed that. So Star Fox, I'm not sure it was a great choice to put him in the comic. He's not in the Avengers for that long. He's in there for about 30 issues before he leaves the team. Okay, this is the beginning of a storyline. This crosses over with Fantastic Four in a way that's just not very important. But 233 begins an important thing. The Vision tries to pass through this weird bubble, and it completely short-circuits him. And the Avengers put him in this stasis thing, and he's unconscious, and they don't know what's happened to him. They're trying to fix him, and they don't know. Vision and Scarlet Witch sort of return to the team here to help out on this emergency, and it leads to them rejoining, or Vision in particular, rejoining the team. Because what ends up happening is, here we get a Scarlet Witch retrospective. So if you're a fan of Scarlet Witch, this is a really good issue to have because it goes over her history. 235. But what's happening in the background in these stories is that the Vision ends up connecting to Isaac, the supercomputer AI that runs Star Fox's home planet of Titan, the moon of Titan. And it ends up sort of rewiring his brain because he's got this mind control thing in his head that Ultron put there, makes him susceptible to this sort of thing. And so his interaction with Isaac basically rewires his personality in a way where he decides he needs to become Isaac, but for Earth. So he tries to take over the entire world. It's a great storyline that's sort of running in the background at this point. So that's 235. 236, 237 is a fun story with Spider-Man where he decides to join the team because they make quite a bit of money as sort of their weekly stipend for being in the Avengers. And so he's like, wow, if I had known that, I would have joined the Avengers a long time ago. And we see in this issue why that doesn't really work, because he's sort of a loose cannon that's getting in everybody's way all the time. And at the end, the Avengers are kind of like, yeah, nah. Here's 238. This is where Vision, his physical form is still stuck in the tube, but he learns to project this image, and he sort of comes back. And this is the new mind-controlled Isaac version of Vision. 239. Here's a classic. This is the issue where they meet David Letterman. It's got Fabian Stankiewicz in it. It's Assistant Editor Month. They put the go-go checks on it. So, a lot of great stuff. Okay, 240. Jessica Drew, Spider-Woman. I don't know. This issue for me, the Spider-Woman series, it ended a little bit before this, and this is one of these things where they're tying up loose ends from a canceled title. So I didn't really understand anything that was happening in it, other than what they explain. But that does lead into 241. It's a two-parter, and it's fine. 242, Vision's back. And Vision implements his plan by convincing the Wasp, who is acting chairman, to basically leave, to stand down as chairman. It coincides with the Avengers disappearing for Secret Wars. So here he is, 243. Oh, I forgot to mention. Let me rewind a couple issues, okay? Let's go back to 236. Here's an inexplicable decision. 235, right? All right. Sorry, I wanted to talk about this. 235 is the last issue with the Marvel Comics Group banner across the top. And that makes sense to me because the reason they put that to begin with is because of newsstands. Because there was a couple different ways that comics would be displayed. Spinner racks, so there'd be comics like this in spinner racks, or in like magazine racks where they'd be displayed like this. Right? That's how the corner box came to be in the first place. Is it was designed so you could tell what the comic was, even if only this much is peeking out from behind a magazine. But now we're into the early 80s now. It's like 83, 84, 83. And so the direct market's really taking off. And so this is not nearly as important anymore. And so Marvel decides to drop this banner, giving them a lot more real estate for the cover so they can move the logo up and the cover can be more prominent. Okay, great. Following all of that sounds great. But they also changed the logo. This is the classic Avengers logo, which is the best Avengers logo of all time. Right? It started with issue 96, runs through 235. They replaced it with this thing. And I don't know what they were thinking. Because this logo is poop. This logo is straight poop. I mean, this logo is great. Poop. Look at the two together. Ugh. I don't know what they were doing. I mean, honestly, what were they thinking? So, I just wanted to mention that because it really struck me with this cover. 244. This is part of a company-wide crossover. This is just a little bit before they started really labeling these company-wide crossovers. There's a couple of these proto-crossovers that take place over multiple books but don't have like a banner or a logo telling you that's what's happening. And so you may not be aware of it going on, but of course this is crossing over with the end of the ROM series. Because in ROM 65-66, there's a storyline where all the heroes in the Marvel Universe get together with ROM to fight off the Dire Wraith invasion. And leading up to that, there was a number of comics that had crossovers with ROM where the individual teams were fighting the Avengers. Mostly in X-Men, but also in Avengers and a couple other places. So this is where part of a two-parter where they're crossing over with ROM. And I love ROM, so I'm all for it. 246. Okay, here's a multi-part story with the Eternals that frankly I don't think is that great. There's some really good stuff in this era, but again, between the terrible logo, the subpar, I don't want to say subpar, but the very unexciting Al Milgrom artwork, and some of these so-so stories, I understand why this run isn't quite looked at as highly as it's about to be, because the run really gets much better. No coincidence around the time that John Buscema takes over the pencils, which is going to be in the next Avengers video because it's not for a few more issues. 247, Into the Unimind. This is one of the earliest back issues that I got. I got it like in a multi-pack of back issues, probably around the time issue 260 was out. My first issue was 256. So, not too long after that, there's a couple that I got in like multi-packs. 255, 247 was one of them. More Eternals. It's kind of an unusual choice here. They have 3 covers in a row with plain white backgrounds. Usually when you're looking through these, they try and vary it, particularly because a lot of places would still have multiple issues on the stands. So when you're having multiple months worth of issues like in a comic book store, you want them to look different. But they have several in a row here with all white covers. Demon Storm, featuring Thor, Hercules, and the Fantastic Four. Now, at this point, She-Hulk is in the Fantastic Four because of Secret Wars. And Thor hasn't been in the lineup since around the time Star Fox joined. I think he left around that same time, 232, which is around the time where Walt Simonson took over with at the same time as Avengers 237. So Thor left the book for that reason, but here he is guest starring. And then 250, another all-white cover, giant-sized anniversary issue. Again, these issues are just okay. It's really going to pick up shortly after this because we get the culminate, like the climax of the Vision stuff that's going on in the background really takes off right at the beginning, like 251 to 254 is all the Vision stuff coming to a head, and it's really cool. And so, like, the main stories in a lot of these are just so-so, but there's a lot of great character stuff with Monica learning how to be a superhero, but Vision also manipulating things throughout these issues. So there's a lot of great subplots that make these comics sort of better. They're like the sum of their parts, the whole is greater than the sum of their parts, or whatever I'm trying to say. Anyway, so that's it. That's Avengers 201 to 250. Sometime soon I'll be showing off the next batch, 251 to 300, which is very near and dear to my heart because my first issue is 256. So a lot of those are the copies that I bought off the spinner rack at the time in the 1980s when I first started reading Avengers and first started getting comics. So those are really important to me, and I'm looking forward to showing you those. But for now, that's it. Let me know what you think down below. I'll have all the links to all the things, and I'll see you next time.